So it looks like we are live. Thanks for joining us. I want to say thank you for kind of dealing with what's going on today. Originally, this was supposed to be on Facebook Live, but Facebook's having a whole bunch of problems today. One of them being that Facebook Live is down, and so we had to. Originally, this was supposed to be on Facebook Live. 1 second. But Facebook's having a whole bunch of problems. Sorry about that. So yeah, we're going to get this going. Facebook Live's having a whole bunch of problems. And so we couldn't get it there, had to switch it to YouTube. Took us a little bit longer, but I appreciate y'all joining us for the AND Campaign's Crux session on masculinity. Is it toxic or is it vital? And just for a little bit of background, number one, I'm Justin Gibney, the president of the AND Campaign. And really our Crux sessions are about maybe really just having a biblical and critical exchange on issues in terms where we think there needs to be a little bit of a biblical framework added to the conversation, really trying to get to the crux or the heart of the matter. And so we're not going to be addressing this as experts. We're just going to address it as in everyday terms and try to apply, our experience, but more importantly, the biblical standards that we know to this conversation. One of the reasons that we do the Crux session is because we found that Christians too often jump on one side of an issue or the other without necessarily realizing that the biblical perspective often differs from the prominent perspectives that are offered by the world. And so we just want to make sure that we're kind of offering somewhat of a biblical perspective to issues like masculinity, which are really becoming toxic within themselves. So it's not just me here today. I have Erica Collier. She is a educator, a wife, a mother. She's on the AND Campaign's Leadership Council. She's a singer and all those things. I also have a father, a husband, an artist, the man, the legend, Sho Baraka. How are y'all doing today?
Doing very well, Justin. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Doing good. Thank you.
Good stuff, man. Well, thank you for joining this Crux session. This is the first Crux session that we've done this year, and really just want to get into it. Guys, I don't know how much more vitriolic the conversation about masculinity and toxic masculinity and emasculation can get. I mean, anybody who spent any amount of time on social media sees folks going back and forth and just a lot of hatred. I don't know how to put it any other way, but just a lot of hatred going back and forth on this issue. And really just wanted to get your thoughts on how did we get here? One example of it is we have one side where there are men who don't see anything as toxic. Basically, the world is your ashtray, and anything that men do, if you try to hold them back, well, now you're trying my manhood, you're trying to emasculate me. And then the other side, it seems that folks think everything, and these are the two extremes, obviously, but it seems that folks think everything that is masculine or that is male-centered is toxic. For instance, one of the things that happened, I think either earlier this week or last week, is Terry Crews. Terry Crews, who had talked a lot about masculinity, really went from being an ally to some of those folks to opposition when he made the simple statement in a tweet that children needed mothers and fathers. And that brought Teen Vogue to write a thought piece saying that he was perpetuating toxic masculinity by making that statement. Erica, help me out. How did we get here?
Okay, so just a little brief on me. So I've just had a baby, and I have purposely taken a social media sabbatical. So some of this is new to me, and I'm thankful. So yeah, I haven't been on since I've had the baby, and that was December 16th. But so I love how you said biblical framework, because that's where I'm going to come from, because I have opinions, but God is the one who ordains everything. So, but the first time that I think in the scriptures we hear anything about masculinity is in Genesis, I think 1:26 through 27, talks about how God made man in his image, and in his image he created them, male and female, he created them. So this idea that saying that someone needs a mother and a father, again, I'm just taking your word for it. That's not biblical to retaliate against something like that. That's actually a true statement. God made his image diversely, male and female, to reflect himself. And I do believe that one of the ways he does that is in how we work together in parenting. So yeah, that's definitely a comment from the times that we're in right now.
Yeah. And just generally, how do you feel like we got to this point where men and women, where this argument just got to be so kind of a vitriolic and aggressive? Like, why is this such a tough conversation for us today?
I think a lot of the most recent events, a lot of Hollywood scandals with sexual harassment. We've got that documentary, Surviving R. Kelly. What this is not necessarily revealing something that's brand new. Most women are aware of this conversation and are aware of this conversation at a very young age, even if not intellectually, just by nature of being a woman. I think the way we got here, though, like I said, it's all new and it seems new, but it's an old conversation. And I, again, have to take it back to Genesis. And I'm going to throw that out there to you guys because I'm still exploring it. And you're right, I am not an expert on this issue, but there's something in the scriptures. Hold on, I lost my train of thought there. Again, just had a baby, so give me a second. You asked me, what? Can you repeat that question?
Just generally, how did this argument get to be so aggressive and just vitriolic?
Like I said, I think it starts in the beginning. Sin. That's where it comes from. I think, like I said, with a lot of these new things coming out, I think the conversation is just brought to light, kind of like the race conversation with social media and Facebook Live and all these things. The conversation is just brought to the surface, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I don't think that many of us are well versed in engaging this conversation head on. And so in the beginning, you're going to have lots of, passionate arguments about it. But ultimately, anytime there's a general sense of oppression, male to female, whenever things are exposed, I'm just restating the same thing. I think that's where we're getting this from. It's a newer conversation for this generation.
Okay. So, what are your thoughts? How we get here, brother?
Well, I would like to echo some of the things, some of the sentiments that Erica communicated. I think one, to kind of start from a different foundation, when we talk about vitriol and polarization, I don't know if it's just something new, right? I think as long as we've had people of different backgrounds, ethnicities, races, there's always been a vitriol. I think the new platforms have created it, has exponentially created more tension and more vitriol. So you think social media, you think traditional media, and is giving people a voice to communicate, and even some folks a voice that didn't have a voice, but then also is giving us more information more quickly, and our inability to use that information in wise ways creates cynicism, or it creates vitriol. Right? You can have a lot of information, and sometimes you use that information as a weapon, and that can be very dangerous. And I think what's happened is as Erica said, like, these have been issues that specifically around this topic, women have been discussing for a long time. And I think because of particular platforms, now more people are being exposed. Now that academia can stretch outside of just the four walls of its institutions, you got your academics who are now on social media sharing their insight. And so we have greater contact with people who have different ideas and views. And I think what's happened is, because our world is so polarizing, I think it's created an opportunity for good discussion, even if some of those discussions can be exaggerated or are polarized. I just said polarized, as you said, by extremes. It still needs to be had, and so I feel like we've gotten here because, truthfully, throughout history, men have been pretty terrible in certain areas, and so therefore in general, the idea of masculinity needs to be discussed. It definitely needs to be discussed. But I like the idea of what AND Campaign is doing is how do we discuss it? Do we discuss it in a way that's beneficial, or do we just discuss it in our shouting and being antagonizing to one another?
No, those are some very good points. And I think at the end of the day, we can all agree it needs to be discussed. A lot of this comes from the fact that for years, even within the church. And so, we don't want to act like the church hasn't been part of this conversation, and a problem within this conversation with women not being treated equally, women not being respected in the way that they should be respected. And so this conversation, whether we think it's out of control or not, is it's been a long time coming for it to be in the center of society and be a real conversation that everybody's having. And maybe because it's built up so much, you have this purge, kind of what Erica was saying, you have this purge because it's been built up and repressed for so long. And finally, we're having the conversation, and it doesn't always come out in a pretty way when we have the conversation that way. I think you guys had some very good insights.
Absolutely.
There.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I would say, though, another question that I have is, what examples of masculinity kind of molded or informed your understanding within your formative years of masculinity? I can say for me, I kind of had two conflicting models, right? I had the first model was kind of like the James Evans, model. For those of you that don't know, James Evans was the father on Good Times. And basically based off my father, pieces of him, pieces of my grandfather, my uncles, the folks I've been around, that was one of the main models that I had. And when you looked at somebody like James Evans, one of the things you saw was headship, right? He was the head of his household, and the things that came with that. And then also the things that qualified him to be the head of the household. So he was disciplined. He went to work every day. He was that dutiful provider, whereas, he came last. Everybody else would be taken care of in the house, and then he would be taken care of afterwards. And then you had the protector, right, which is a huge part of how many people see masculinity, was this toughness, being tough enough to actually protect your family. Now, we know all of those things can be taken out of can be excessive at some point. But that was one of the things that I saw. Now, even with the James Evans model, right, this wasn't a perfect model, right? There was some chauvinism there. There were some problematic things even within that model. But it was certainly better than the second model that I got, which was kind of, and I know you're from the West Coast too, or from the West too. It was the Eazy-E Too Short model, right? That model that you get when your cousin slides you that NWA album, and you get like complete misogyny, everything that comes with it. You're judged by how many women you're sleeping with, how much money you have. Those things that really hit you pretty hard. I remember when the NWA movie first came out, me and Sho, I think we were on a flight somewhere. I can't remember where we were going. And we were just like, this is hilarious that people, not hilarious, but interesting that people are actually making this like NWA was primarily this Black Power movement that, just changed. Right. When as a young person, and I started listening to NWA unfortunately probably about 9 years old, that probably wasn't mostly what I got from it. I probably got more of the misogyny from it than anything else. Can y'all talk to me, starting with Sho, can y'all talk to me just about the models and kind of what informed your understanding of masculinity throughout the year?
Yeah, so very similar to you. I think there's always various different forms. You have various teachers, right? And those teachers can they deposit beneficial things and they deposit detrimental things. And for about the Eazy-E's, even say a majority of the hip hop music or the entertainment that I consumed was highly chauvinistic. And it taught me that people, not just women, but people were tools for me to achieve things, right? But the one good thing that it taught me was determination, right? It taught me determination, but hopefully you weren't determined to use people to get to the things that you wanted, right? So there's always good and bad, but then I had, and rest in peace, my father. My father was a 6'4" or 260-pound defensive end who played for the New Orleans Saints. So you would assume he was a strong, demonstrative individual, and he was physically strong and very strong in like, I guess you can say character. But the one thing he was, I will say to his detriment, was somewhat passive, right? And so for me, when I think of like toxic masculinity, I don't necessarily see it as someone who's demonstrative, running around so verbally or physically. Someone who is afraid to lead and who is afraid to take initiative, because I felt like in certain ways I adopted some of those characteristics from some of the men that I were around because they were quite passive. And so I will say that if I wasn't learning things on the football field or in the entertainment world to be extremely and overly aggressive, this is how you manage, or this is how you handle your aggression. Then the other thing you did is you just suppressed and you just kind of retreated from any kind of responsibility. And both of those things were harmful. And I realized not until I got into like my latter college years that those things also kept me away from being successful in avenues and lanes in which
I think Show froze on us a little bit.
Okay.
Is he frozen?
I think so too.
Erica?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
definitely frozen over here.
Erica, take it from here. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the influences that you had, what models you saw growing up, and how that stuck with you.
Yeah, well, so I was raised from the age 2 by my stepfather, and I didn't really know my dad. Didn't meet him, my biological father, until I was in my mid-20s. But my stepdad, he set a wonderful example of just faithfulness. One reason being because I'm still in touch with him today, and he's no longer married to my mother, but he's made a commitment to me. I remember when I was 5 years old, I was the lightest one in the house. And so it was just like, for me, hey, how come everybody else looks like this? And why do I look like this? And I asked him, I was like, so, you must not be my real dad. And he said, all you need to know is that I am your father. And that stuck with me. So until this day, I don't want to get too emotional. He is there for me. So that was beautiful to experience. Another thing that I learned from him, so he's military. I grew up in Germany. So we moved to Germany when I was 3 and I came back and I've been in Atlanta since I was 10. But structure, order, I know what it is to honor my mother and father. He did a great job of kind of like creating those frameworks for me. So really faithfulness, structure, and order are some really, and provision. Oh my goodness, he provided for us. So that's pretty much the male influences that I've had growing up. And also because of the military background, I naturally gravitated to ROTC in high school and went up those ranks. So that's been a heavy theme as far as my understanding of masculinity.
Were there any, just in the neighborhood or around, were there any negative kind of influences that you had to address or that you had to kind of filter out through the years, or even music? I mean, me and Show brought up kind of hip hop and all that stuff. How did you deal with those things during your more formative years?
It was a frustrating thing because I love music, and you hear a good beat, you want to start singing. I learned all the words until the B word comes, or until he's like talking about a woman in a way that's just not appropriate. I'm like, I can't continue to sing this. I feel like I'm dissing myself. So that was really hard, particularly in middle school. I was in Riverdale. That was an era of like Too Short, Uncle, can't remember his name, so just very vulgar images and words about women on the radio. And they did not discriminate on what time of the day they played those songs. So definitely made a mark on me. And I think it's encouraged me to care so much about justice today, to be very honest.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with some friends and just thinking about how much we learned from hip hop and rap, and it wasn't all bad. I mean, some of it was
definitely not. Yeah,
some of it was somewhat edifying, but in a lot of ways, at those times when my dad might not want to have those conversations with me, I was getting that message from somewhere else. I was getting those messages, which were very much toxic in a lot of instances because they were so provocative, right? So one of the things about hip hop at the time, and even now to some extent, is what's provocative sells. And so provocative conversations about women, the most extreme things you can say, the most domineering things that you can say, is kind of what sells. It's kind of what you hear. And so when I was listening again to NWA back in the day, to hear some of the concepts that they were bringing up, first of all, I could barely even understand them, but what I really did understand of it just was not a healthy conversation. And I think for me, as someone who's been openly said that there was some toxic behavior in my life, some locker room behavior in my life that I really had to deal with through Christ and really get my life right in that regard, that's something that I don't hide. When I look back, I just see how much of an impact the music that I listened to, the people that are around, and what we were bumping in the car had an impact on how I treated women. And still today, that's very important. One of the things I wonder about is a lot of the people who are talking about toxic masculinity quite a bit still don't always kind of bring up the music that they listen to, or some of the people who they may be promoting to actually promote some of this stuff. And so it's an interesting conversation that I think we probably need to have in a more real way. But let me ask you this. I mean, it's very clear that part of the reason why this came to a head, part of the reason why it is on the agenda and we're having this conversation is because of the Me Too movement. And we know through whether it's R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, or whoever it is, the Me Too movement really brought this to the fore and made us have this conversation to a certain extent. What should the church be learning from the Me Too movement? And guys, before you answer that question, show got kicked off. He just texted me he's coming back on, but we're going to keep moving until he gets back on. What should the church be learning from the Me Too movement? Because again, the church was not all that far removed from some of this stuff that was going on, unfortunately.
Well, I think one thing that the church can learn is just to acknowledge in a way that we haven't really been doing, that the dignity of womanhood, just the dignity that is woman. I mean, what was so fascinating about Eve when Adam woke up, what was so fascinating was the fact that she was like him. He was like, this is bone of my bone. This is flesh of my flesh. So the fact that she was like him is what caused him to maybe write the first song that we know of, in scripture, or just to be singing in that way. And so when we hear the Me Too movement, it obviously draws attention to sexual misconduct that women have to deal with. And in terms of dignity, if you look in Deuteronomy at all of those laws that God was giving through Moses, and whenever there was some sexual misconduct, a rape, or a young virgin being seduced, you would see God making provisions for her dignity to be restored. He would have to pay a bride price for her. Or if the father refused because he doesn't want you to marry her regardless, then he would still have to pay for her, or marry her, honor her, dignify her. So when we hear things like Me Too, I can't get this imagery out of my head of the Brett Kavanaugh case. Like, I don't know the truth of what happened those years ago, but when I see a woman come forward and confess what happened to her, that takes courage. And the Bible commands us to call out. In those cases in Deuteronomy, it says that if you're able, you should call out or cry out, basically tell that this happened. So in an essence, there's one part of the Me Too movement that I really can appreciate, because we've lost that. We've lost that from fear. It's hard if you've been abused in any situation. It could be power situation. It could be sexual abuse, psychological abuse. It's difficult to cry out. So what I do want the church to see that is positive is that there are people crying out. And trust me, with all of the sexual harassment statistics, rape statistics, human trafficking statistics, they're not even holistic, because most people do not tell, or most people do not cry out. So one thing the church, if we're going to look at this in an aspirational way, is to please understand that if somebody has the courage and happens to tweet Me Too with it, honor that. I mean, everybody's not telling the truth. I know this, I know that. At the same time, just like with the race conversations, when people were coming out telling their stories of how they were discriminated against, it gave other people momentum and courage to do the same. And I think that you will find, if you talk to women, just have real conversations. Hey, I get specific. Have you ever dealt with a case of sexual harassment? I think you'd be amazed at how many women would say yes, or how many times something like that's happened to them in their life. So that's a positive. Of course, there are some negative things, and we know that vitriol sells, kind of like what you were saying. So there may be some things mixed in there, and I don't know necessarily the hearts of the founders, so I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the dignity of womanhood when someone has the courage to share a story of abuse.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. What the Me Too movement brought to it was the dignity conversation, and our women being treated with dignity within the the patriarchy and all these things that we saw. Our men being forced on the job, and in these other situations with President Trump. I mean, we don't want to leave that out, right? That's one of the
Absolutely
reasons that came to a head as well, because of things that he had done, things that he had said, that really made it a national issue, and some women, the women's movement, things like that, seized the moment. And in a lot of ways, I think the church has to say, there's some things we need to learn from this, because there's a lot of things we weren't addressing. While the church should be the one to address this, it wasn't necessarily the first to address it in this particular instance. And I think that's problematic. And so I like the fact that you talked about the dignity side of it, the worth of women, right? The AND campaign's always having a conversation about dignity and how are we treating people with worth. And that wasn't happening the way it should, and it got called out. I love the way you brought the scripture into it. I mean, and it's an interesting issue, because there are biblical characters who you see showing some good signs of masculinity. You can look at David, and, he came in and became king, and he was actually trying to reconcile with people who they would never thought nobody else would have ever reconciled with. But then we also know there was another side of David, right? That's true. Yeah, very toxic, extremely toxic, and really got him into a lot of trouble. And so those are the things we have to look at as well. And so I do think there's a lot to learn from the Me Too movement. I think it was something that had to happen, but I think also what we can learn is when it's not it's not balanced out with kind of some biblical values. Yes, it can be a little bit of harm too. On the whole, I would say that it's a net positive, but the idea, one of the things where I think it could be harmful is just the idea that everyone should be. So let's put it this way. First of all, something it brought to was everybody should be heard. Everybody should be taken seriously. So we can take that and say that's absolutely true. But what I struggle with, especially as an attorney, is the idea that any group of people should automatically be believed when another freedom and reputation are on the line. That's especially true. As a Black male, looking at what has happened to Black males in the past, when it came to those type of allegations and how people lost their lives over that. I think we need to be a little more, to understand it's a little more nuanced. Hear everybody, take them seriously. But at the end of the day, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, there are people in both genders that may be motivated not to tell the truth. That may be very good at not looking like they're telling a falsehood, and it actually happens. And that's why we have due process. So basically what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, take it very seriously, have an open heart and ears to hear, but there's due process for a reason. And the Bible even talks about due process. It talks about witnesses and things of that nature. And so we do have to take those things into consideration when we are addressing these very serious issues. But either way, it needs to be taken seriously. Let me ask this next question, Erica, which is, how has society, and even Christians, how have we maybe limited masculinity or maybe misconstrued masculinity in a harmful way that's harmed men and women?
That is a good question. It's a loaded question. I know you didn't intend it to be, but it's something I have to go back and forth with all of the time, because I'm a wife, and I am a mother of sons and of daughters. So I'm constantly thinking about this issue. One of the things that I think that we really can just use a dose of humility on. I'm not saying that we have completely bad judgment, but for example, in the arts, I've seen a trend over the years that, I've got male friends who are in the arts, and they are full of expression, whether it is poetic, whether it is dance. Yes, I watched the Atlanta Ballet, and there are some very strong masculine men that can lift those ladies up. Just really understanding that culture is not ultimately what dictates masculinity. God is what dictates masculinity, and God and masculinity is only as important as much as we understand how does it reflect the image of God. Because if we, look at one of those catechism questions, I can't remember what it is, but what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever, right? And we're going to go right back to Genesis 1:26 and 27. He created him, man, in his image, and then he created them male and female. So how is it, this distinction that God makes, this is the first time he does it, how is it that male reflects the image of God? Right. So I think that I don't know the answer, but I do certainly know that that's the framework that I think we should really be thinking about, because if we allow culture to dictate that completely, we're going to be skewed. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And something else that we have to consider is just because a lot of this is cultural more than biblical or anything else, or even biological, right?
Yeah.
Where in certain instances we say, well, if a man talks a certain way, if he walks a certain way, if he has certain mannerisms, then you're not a man, right? Then you're not masculine, and because you don't have those outward characteristics. And I think in a lot of ways it's been very hurtful. I think in some ways it's been perpetuated by the church to say you have to do these exact things or else you are not masculine. Now, certainly there are certain things that make you not masculine, right? But I don't know that it was always within the limits of how we put it out there for other people and the lines that we drew that excluded people which we really shouldn't have.
Yes.
So it's just like the conversation that we've been having about different cultures, different people coming from different contexts. Sometimes we allow our context and our culture to drive the conversation and drive the framework more than we actually allow the Bible to drive that framework. We don't actually know how people in the Bible spoke. We don't know who had more of a seemingly feminine walk. It might have been some people that the characters we look up to the most. And so we have to be very careful, I think, at coming at people with those type of limitations, with those type of guidelines when they're not clearly biblical. Now, I will say there is a difference between femininity and masculinity, and that should be recognized too.
Yes.
But wouldn't you say there's been a lot of instances where we've excluded people from the idea of masculinity that really, in a hurtful way, that really wasn't constructive?
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I don't have an exact example for masculinity, but David, for example, let's go back to him. So his hands were so bloody that he was not, hey, show, welcome back. But so we're talking about masculinity and how have we limited some people? And I'm thinking about David. So his hands were so bloody that he was not allowed to build the temple, right? So he is a rough and ready guy. He's killed lots of people, tens of thousands, according to the scriptures. But then you've got a harp player. How do we go from war to playing something very tenderly? You have to have gentle hands and be very intentional when playing the harp. So, I mean, there's a people are dynamic, so you can't just say, oh, this is it. And like you said, we've drawn those lines. Or let's think about femininity. Okay, the Proverbs 31 woman. So we hear that all the time, and we hear how, finding a wife is a good thing, but I don't think that we hear a lot about her entrepreneurial spirit. And it says she worked willingly with her hands. So she was not laid up, set up somewhere, just being taken care of. It says that she was taking care of her family. She laughed at the time to come because she knew her family was good as a result of her work, as a result of her making investments and things like that. So is that okay? Absolutely, it's okay because it's in the scriptures. So I just definitely think that we have to keep in mind that people are dynamic and there is a difference between masculinity and femininity, but God ultimately is the one who made those distinctions. So let's really go to him and see what he says specifically to the different genders.
Yeah, that's good. Just to show up a little bit. I mean, you missed so much. Hopefully you can catch back up. What I was asking Erica was this. What type of things and what kind of ways have we limited what we see as masculinity in ways that are harmful and really have excluded people in a way that wasn't biblical and really wasn't constructive?
So first of all, let me say I'm sorry. My internet went out, and so I was sitting here trying to log back on, but went upstairs, and so anyway, neither here nor there. I don't even know. Like when I was talking, I noticed. I think I was probably yapping, but there was something I was saying that I think I want to kind of refer back to, is that the things that I felt was detrimental to my own upbringing was that real men release their emotion through some sort of physical altercation or a physical outlet, right? So sports, or it was fighting, or it was to be aggressive verbally, whether that be through music or through, jokes or whatever. And in any kind of sincerity of authenticity of how you feel and how you show your emotion or expression in any other kind of way was seen as soft, right? So it was seen as feminine. Those are the things that women do. Those are feminine outlets. And I think, as rightly,
Uh-oh. I think we have lost Show again. Is he gone?
playing a million things that I
There
wish.
he is.
Did I go out again?
You're back
Dang,
in.
bro. Look
You're
at Satan.
back.
Satan busy, cuz.
He don't want you to get it out, bro.
Either that, or I just
I
gotta
really
move
believe
because this
so,
internet is terrible.
Yeah.
My internet is soft, cuz. But yeah. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. So basically, what I would say is, I would encourage is, there are things. I think there are very legitimate reasons why people want to challenge masculinity today.
Mm-hmm.
And those reasons are because they limited individuals like myself to excel in areas and ways in which we thought were very legitimate, right? And if you did express those things, you were called either a punk, you were called, if you know want to be real, you were called a faggot, you were called all these different things, right? And I think because of that dangerous rhetoric, people are challenging the whole construct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of it needs to be challenged, and a lot of it needs to be challenged. Even when we talk about our theology around manhood, womanhood, I think some of that needs to be challenged and repurposed and seen. What does we know what God says, but how have we interpreted what God said and used it for our own manipulation of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because even our churches seem to be very misogynistic and patriarchal and stuff like that. So I will say that for me, I think that, and I kind of forgot what this question was, but I was going back to where I jumped
doing
off.
it.
But yeah, I just think that there's legitimate reasons on why this stuff is being challenged, but I also believe that there are some very key components that are going to be lost and missed if we continue to not overreact, if we continue to overcompensate for or overcorrect. Better yet, I think overcorrect is the word I'm looking for. If we continue to overcorrect the wrongs that have happened in the past, it's right to correct, but I think oftentimes what we want to do is we look past things to see nothing. And I love what G.K. Chester talks about. The point of seeing through something is to see something eventually. And I think at times what we happen to do is just see through things, so we deconstruct everything without eventually building something up.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, can we critique and dispose of toxic masculinity without getting rid of masculinity, right?
Mm-hmm. I would say that's fair.
So for those people who are attacking toxic masculinity, we say, hey, I'm right there with you. I'm gonna stand up with you and repent for the times that I participated in those type of things.
Yeah, and I would also say that
toxic to that same group who is over. What's the words? What would the words say? Where would we come from if we're trying to talk to those who are overcompensating for the wrongs of the past?
Let he who has no sin cast the first stone. I mean,
okay.
We've all got areas. I like to say, and I say it to my children, we've all got a 2-year-old inside, somewhere. It just depends on what area of life is it. And just kind of, we need to have grace and compassion. Christ came down and humbled himself, for us, even to the point of death, and not just death, but death on a cross. And he had every reason to be like, I know everything and you're wrong. But that's not the attitude that he had. And as followers of Christ, I think that, especially followers, I can speak, if you are, proclaiming the name of Christ, then that's something that, humility is real. I mean, I'm talking to myself, just really think about the fact that we are all sinners, and there must be something in you. Like, what is that scripture? Take the log out of your own eye too before you get the speck in your brother's. Like, just examine yourself. Have a healthy dose of self-examination. Not that you don't go and remove that speck or that you don't address the issue. There is an issue that needs to be addressed, but if you don't come with love, you sound like a clanging gong or cymbals. That's from Corinthians chapter 13. So it's hard, but it's a necessary thing to do.
Yeah, sure.
What was the question? One more time.
So, what do you think the Bible would have to say about the folks who are just taking this too far, who are saying, look, historically, women have been treated terribly, toxic masculinity has been everywhere.
Yeah.
What about overcorrecting? You talked about overcorrecting. Right. What's the remedy for that?
I think we prefaced it at the beginning that we are not experts. We're not psychologists and all this other stuff. I will say the one thing that I will want us to be cautious about is everybody has a report or some sort of study that fits their own personal agenda, right? And I think sometimes this person's study omits the social ramifications. This person's study over here omits the scientific evidence. And I would just say, one, we need to all be mindful that usually the person who, the people we read oftentimes can assuage our belief systems. So that's just true. To be mindful of that. That's one. Two, every reaction has consequences is the second thing I will, because what ends up happening is you'll correct something, but you'll build new problems. Mm-hmm. And so we must be aware that there is no such thing as creating utopias. And I love how Erica suggested or communicated it and reiterated the scriptures in the sense of he without sin or she without sin cast the first stone, right? And so I think the one troubling some of the troubling language that I've struggled with, me personally, my own internal, I'm not talking about my friends, I'm just saying this is me. When I see certain language like just believe women, to me, I get it. I get why we've gotten there, right? I understand because women have had it hard, especially in the sense of public opinion. Men have been have been given opportunities that women have been given. Men use their physical power to abuse. They use their position to abuse verbally. However, I know I personally have been manipulated and mistreated by women in ways that could have put me in places like prison. You know what I'm saying? And I won't go into too many details, but I've also known that throughout history, Black men have been falsely accused of rape many times throughout. And so for us to just blankly say, like, just believe women, I think is an overcorrection of a real problem. The real problem is that women need to be heard and that women need to be treated fairly in the judicial system, in our corporate spaces, in the household, in our churches. But if all we're going to do is say, no, you know what, let's not trust men let's not listen to men or give them due process, then I feel like that is a problem. And then what's going to happen is we're going to find ourselves in a situation where I think in the news recently where women have accused individuals of rape and men have, and they've come back and said, no, it was a lie, et cetera, et cetera. Now, obviously, there are probably many more accounts where the opposite have happened, where they've been accused and found to be proven right, or if they have accused individuals and those individuals have been rightly indicted. But I will say for us just to say, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater is an overcorrection that things needs to be evaluated deeply.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Because at the end of the day, it seems like when we find an issue that really resonates with us,
absolutely,
we want to have this perfect narrative, right? Mm-hmm. We need a narrative that regardless of where the argument goes, we're right. And so in trying to have a perfect narrative, which we're broken people, nobody has a perfect narrative, we create these fictions to go along with our narrative, to go along with our story. And so the fiction sometimes in these is that a woman would never lie about this, ever.
Absolutely.
It never happened. Now, we know that we can say that in most cases that probably isn't, that may be true. She's not, she's telling the truth. But if any of us really looked at our life, there is no man that tells the truth all the time. There's no woman that tells the truth all the time. Do we have to create these type of fantasies, right? These fictions to actually address a real issue? And I think that the fiction hardens people's hearts and keeps some people from actually addressing the issue. So I think we need to stay away from that. But also going with what Erica said, as a Christian, I'm all for being passionate about this issue, really driving home how serious it is and making people deal with it. That's great. But you can't be out for blood, right? Should people be held accountable? Absolutely. Should people go to jail if that's something that they've participated in? Yes. But are you trying to reconcile, or are you just out for blood, revenge, vengeance, and all that stuff? We really have to answer that question when we have these conversations about this, about race, and everything else. Because at the end of the day, like you said, there's something in our life that probably isn't right. There's an issue that we're not paying attention to that we should be paying attention to. And so we really have to watch how we approach those issues. Now,
Yeah,
I kind of want to give voice because we've been a little bit, I want to give voice to the other side of the conversation too. There are brothers who would say, look, it is very clear that society is trying to emasculate men, especially black men. Some people would point to the fact that during slavery, men were actually castrated, things of that nature, and that on both sides of the spectrum, from conservatives and the more progressive or liberal side, it's questionable whether they've ever really been comfortable with black masculinity. So to give voice to that conversation, is there an effort? Because it's hard to say that pop culture isn't controlled by a more progressive kind of point of view. Is there an effort within academia, within pop culture, to emasculate men even before this started going on? Is there anything to that?
I mean, if you're a conspiracy theorist, then I guess you can say yes. And just to clarify a point, I made a statement about black men being falsely accused. And I think it ties into this. Historically, black men being falsely accused of raping white women, and knowing that that would lead to a speedy conviction and death in a lot of ways, right? So I just wanted to clarify, because I don't know if I got a chance to finish that thought. But
Sure.
In similar fashion, I think what we see today is the fear of just one, sexualized black men, or black men who seem to have some sort of I don't want to say power to them, but authority to them that's under control. I think that's a scary thing, right? It's a scary thing to have power, but to have that power under control. And I don't know who's actually to blame for, or I can't point to this particular entity and say, hey, these individuals are trying to emasculate me. But I do see a strategic effort to try to, like when I watch commercials and I see commercials about toxic masculinity, when I see certain types of men celebrated in mass media versus individuals where I still can't find on daytime TV, and I must admit that I don't go surfing religiously, but I struggle to find holistic black men on these TV shows, on these movies, right? But it's easy to find gay black men. It's easy to find black men who are passive or silly, or black men who are aloof. And it's almost like the recreating of caricatures from Jim Crow in a lot of ways, just repackaging them in different ways. And so I'm not about conspiracy theories, but what I am saying is, like, I do think I'll just stop there, because sometimes I'll just stop there.
Okay. Erica?
I'm coming from a different perspective, so I don't have much to say about that. However, just hearing show talk, I'm running through shows that I know in my head. I have seen that narrative a lot. And so I know we talked about our backgrounds earlier, but so my mother and stepdad, they divorced when I was about 13. So I went a long period without an example, I guess, in the home. And I will definitely say this, that I know my husband, there's a contrast, like, between the black men characters I see on TV, just his character, his dedication to the family,
Right.
I don't know, I just love my husband. He's amazing. Kurt Collier, woo! But I definitely would say that there's a different narrative. And that's why my children, we are very particular about what sorts of images they get to see on TV, because even though it may not be like curse words or sexually inappropriate, there are some images that I don't want flaunted in their face, like you said, show complete passivity, or the comic relief always. Those are kind of, I'm not sure if that's what you're saying, but.
No, yeah, yeah, exactly. And it seems if like we either have two, we have like the paradigm of being that or extremely exceptional. It's like there's no middle ground, right? And so to your point, true. I want a regular black man who is I mean, yeah. I'm sorry, I cut you off on this. So
and I would like to say, I know that we are probably going to get to that, but just how the different cultures, how they play a part in this conversation in general. Like you guys brought it up, talking about black males. But I definitely think we would be amiss if we didn't acknowledge that certain cultural norms also can affect this. I mean, for example, my first time when I watched Black Panther, I was not thinking about race as much as I was thinking about how women are being honored. They're at the table, they're having discussions, or or just that there are female warriors. That's a thing, in some countries. So I think definitely there's a race or just an ethnicity and cultural element that is going to affect the whole conversation too.
Right.
Yeah. And we don't even have to get all the way into the conspiracy theory of it to say there seems to be in pop culture, because maybe of the history, a distrust of masculinity. And because of that distrust of masculinity in pop culture and also in academia, you see some things that just come off as boys being boys. And I don't mean boys being boys by getting away with anything they want to, but just being more aggressive in how they learn, how they play, may not be able to sit as long as girls do, seen as negative. And so I think there are some instances where society is overcorrecting once again when it comes to masculinity, because it's seen generally as a negative thing, and the more passive or docile kind of perspective is seen as something that's necessary and wanted. Now, something we have to talk about is that we don't often look at this with a historical lens, right? And so are we creating a society where there's no room for kind of the warrior class, right? The people who are more aggressive, not in a way that's hurting people, right? I'm not even going there. For the people who are more aggressive, because if you look throughout history, your civilizations that lasted for a while always had a warrior class. And so to be aggressive, not that every man has to be aggressive, but to be aggressive, to take action, to be a protector in a real way, most of those societies, and you can read it from the philosophers and whoever, they understood, no, we have to have a warrior class, right? You don't do away with your warrior class just because you're in a time of peace. No, you give them, you allow them to be sword fight. You allow them to do this and that, because at the end of the day, just like women are necessary for a society, the warrior class, the warrior scholar, as I like to talk about quite a bit, is also necessary for society. Yes. And I do think as this conversation changes, we're leaning more to the side of saying, well, are these people even necessary, right? We're in a time of peace. We're in a time where there's, it's not as hectic as it has been other times. Do we need this warrior class here? Do we even want things that are warrior-ly, right? You see, and obviously it has a lot to do with the safety of the sport, obviously. But even the attack on more aggressive sports, things, football, things of that nature, do we even want these things? And one of the things when it comes to masculinity, to me, because some of this is even tied in with like your helicopter parents and just trying to make sure that our kids are protected from everything. Whereas part of how I was taught to be taught about manhood was that your life isn't just about protecting yourself. Absolutely. Right. And so there are certain risks that you take in life, whether they be somewhat physical risks or other risks, because it makes you stronger, because it makes you better. Right. Our society today seems to say, no, let's not take any of those risks. Let's just avoid these risks, because at the end of the day, the primary objective is to survive and to live without being hurt. Do either of you see anything to that, to say, like, can this warrior class exist? Are those virtues that they even the gentleman, right? You can be a gentleman but have a warrior side. And so room for that in modern society.
And so that's what I was gonna like. I think a lot of the examples you used were more of individuals who have vocational, physical vocations, like athletes or soldiers. But one of the things that I think we miss out on with this attribute if we eliminate these people, or people who are just gentlemen, or people who intervene for other folks, like who
Yeah.
use their own lives to intervene. Right? I remember a young lady being physically abused on my high school campus one time, and I remember coming out the bathroom. It was like in between classes, so that there were nobody outside. And I remember my friend stepping out of the bathroom and seeing this dude, and he apparently didn't go to school there. And I remember us just being like, "Yo, what should we do? What should we do?" And we just kind of screamed at him like, "Yo, what's up?" And I didn't want none with him because the brother looked like he was about 5 years older than me. I didn't want the physical. I didn't want the hands but I was like, "Yo, we got to do something. Like, we got to say something or do something." Yeah. And so that little interaction, you know what I'm saying? And I was hoping, like, man, if I had to get to the place where I was going to have to physically intervene, I would do it. I know I probably would have got my tail kicked, but hey, and so that type of attribute is the warrior individual, like knowing that there are going to be times where I have to sacrifice myself for the benefit of other people. And I think what happens is in trying to get people to suppress that passion in them, you create passivity in folks, right?
Yes.
And I think that's quite dangerous, not only in men but in women as well, right? And there are women who have that about them. And I do think there are studies out there who talk about, this is something that you find more frequently in boys. This is why boys are more likely to be engaged in violent crimes. This is why they're more likely for this and for that. And so this is why I say, like, in some ways we can't just throw out biology. Like, biology is there somehow. Testosterone does something to us. And so if testosterone does something to us, then in some sense, even if we remove ourselves out of a religious context, then there's a distinct difference between men and women. And like I said, I'm not an expert and I'm not trying to speak authoritatively, but I do think that's a platform, or that's a foundation on which we should speak. And if we're trying to remove the distinctiveness in people, then I do think we're going to find ourselves in some serious trouble, especially in that context when it comes to defending the honor of people, and not just in war, but defending the honor of people in social settings, in emotional settings, et cetera, et cetera.
I think as you guys keep talking, the word that keeps coming to me is fortitude. It's courage in pain or adversity. And it can, like you said, it can be applied to war, but also social settings. But in general, that's a person and a type that we do need to protect. I direct a homeschool community here, and that's one of the things that I'm thankful for. Every week, we meet once a week. And there are some boys, and one of my girls, they are just, they are about it. They can't sit down very long, but, there's nothing wrong with them. They are different. And I have to even check myself a lot, because when it's time for class to start, it's time for class to start. I don't need you to sit down. At the same time, I have to temper myself and think, okay, I can't say no all the time. They do need to run around. They do need to do this. This is who they are. So it's definitely something that I think even in education that could really stand to be addressed. I look at some of the boys, my son included, in our homeschool community, and I just thank God. I'm so thankful that you have the opportunity to go home and run around all day tomorrow, because like you said, you really don't want to. It's just a fine balance. I can babble all day. It's a really fine balance.
Yeah, the next question I'd say is, like, is there room? Because a lot of the conversation when we talk about masculinity and the problem that people have with masculinity is that it doesn't allow for equality between the sexes, right? It makes men kind of the standard, and then women are just lacking what a man has, right? And we know that's wrong. But can we have equality that acknowledges difference? Because sometimes, again, I think we're making this fiction where, again, men and women are the same, but don't we have to have an equality that acknowledges physiological differences? Don't we have to have an equality that acknowledges that there are, psychological and emotional differences between men and women? And if we don't, aren't we harming one or the other, right? To pretend like they're all the same and to pretend that there's no difference can be harmful. Guys, do you think there's an opportunity to have an equality that acknowledges difference, and how do we go about that?
I don't know how to go about it exactly. I don't have a 5-step plan, but I am going to go back to that biblical framework. You are very right. If we don't have an equality that acknowledges difference, then that's not biblical. God said he established an equality when he said in his image. So equally in his image, he created him, which is the general mankind. In his image, he created them male and female. So now we're plural, but we're still talking about the same general mankind. He makes that, he states basically that there's an equality. Then he states that there's a difference. So yes, it's possible. And I believe that it would be honoring to God to try to search that out. But again, the framework, it has to come from scripture, because God is the one, he doesn't have opinions on this issue. He's the one that sets the creative order. And I don't mean order in terms of who's first and last. I mean order in terms of it's not chaotic. So, I mean, I think doing that, making that space is just really the beginnings of honoring what God was doing in the garden.
That's good. So,
Yeah, I think it takes one of the things that I am learning, it takes individuals who have position and power to recognize where they may have marginalized other people and give those people opportunity and agency, as folks say, right? Mm-hmm. My own personal story is that I've been engaged in a work recently where I am not, where I've had to at some point submit to two women. And I remember having a conversation with them, and I was like, you know what, this is really informative to me, because outside of my wife, I don't know any other context in which I've had to literally submit to a woman in a creative process, like in a substantial time period. Right. I mean, obviously, like for one day on a little project here, there, but for a long-term project, this is the first time I've ever had, because I've never went to a church where there was a woman pastor. I never worked for a woman who was my boss, and so it taught me a lot of things. It's teaching me things even now, and so. And the funny thing is I brought one of the women on, like, to the project, and but the individuals, men specifically, who had the tendency to lead in these particular positions, have to recognize where their weaknesses are, and our leaders in general have to recognize where their weaknesses are and give difference to people to lead. And we see that biblically. We see individuals like Deborah who take leadership, and I think Israel thrives because of it. We see Priscilla and Aquila partnering together in leadership, and the kingdom thrives because of it. We see Lydia. We see multiple examples in the New Testament. Mary and Martha being the messengers to proclaim the risen Christ, right? So we see the Lord giving women special directives to be leaders, to lead in particular ways. And the other thing is, men can't be threatened by that, right? Men just can't allow themselves to be threatened by great leadership. That's just in general, right? And I think part of the problem is that some of us are just threatened by leadership in general, like male or female. We don't want to, people just don't see to want to just to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of other people. So in leadership in general, the goal is to try to make mini-me so that I can replace myself eventually, right? But the tendency is, well, I can better do that to a male because I feel like I have a better connection, but we struggle with even doing that. And so
that's deep.
I do think it's possible. I do think it's possible to have equality, but yet celebrate differences. And I try to exemplify that in my own home, where I recognize my wife is more talented at things. You come to my house and you want to grill some chicken, or you want to grill, I don't eat the chicken, but if you want to grill some meats, Show Baraka ain't grilling. Guess who's gonna be grilling? My wife's gonna be grilling. Yeah. And folks be trying to clown me.
Yes,
folks be like, no. You the man of the house. You supposed to be grilling, dog. I'm like, no, guess what's gonna happen? If I grill, that food gonna come out nasty. My wife is talented. She's called in this. She's the greater. She's called to do this, right? Yeah. If my wife builds furniture,
I was about to say she builds, right?
Right. I'm not gonna build nobody's furniture. I built the furniture that's falling apart. So I allow her to exercise her gifts in a way that is going to make this family thrive. And having a daughter has also taught me this in ways where I want my daughter to have opportunities, that I have, right?
Yeah.
But I also realize be limited in certain, like, if her goal is to play in the NFL, I'm like, baby, that's not your calling. You know what I'm saying? There are avenues in which I think you can thrive as a woman. But guess what? You are talented. You're equal to anybody, and so on and so forth. So
no, that's good. So we're running out a little bit of time, and so I just wanted you guys, as best you can, to give me a biblical vision of masculinity. Right? If we're gonna end this, we should end it by saying, okay, according to the word, what does masculinity look like? And it doesn't have to be a super tight definition, but what are some of the guidelines that we've been given, Erica?
Wow, you just put me on the spot. But biblical. I know, right? Well, I mean, at the risk of sounding redundant, but I've just been so pressed with, in my pursuit of knowledge, I love academics. I love studying to no end. But in my pursuit of knowledge, I found that a lot of the answers that we're looking for right in front of our face, and they are plain and simple. And that is to acknowledge that God himself, who decides what is what, intentionally created his image. He created image bearers to reflect him, male and female. And I think, in what ways does masculinity glorify and reflect the image of God? How can we have masculinity that reflects who God is? And that's going to be, I mean, that's for male and female. But at the same time, I think that's a good starting place to understand that it is a good thing that God created it. He created it before sin. He created genders before sin. So it's good to have male and it's good to have female. But acknowledging that we really have to do a lot of work to seek the Lord. That's where we are, where I believe we are. We have allowed culture to infiltrate our idea of masculinity so very much that I think it's time that we start with ground zero. And that's why I'm so thankful that you even invited me to come and help start the conversation, because we are at the beginning. Make no mistake, I believe.
Right. Thank you. Show?
Yeah. I don't know how to answer this question, man. Tell you the truth. I definitely believe in the difference of male and female. So I guess the answer would be partially someone who is biologically a male and identifies as a male biologically, but
it's a good place to start.
yeah, very good.
But I will say that, from there, it's an individual who doesn't abuse the powers and the resources given them for their own benefit, right? Who recognize that they may be physically stronger or positionally stronger than someone, but they don't use those positions or physicality at the detriment of other people. They use it for the blessing and the benefit of folks. And just for the sake of just trying to be very, very poignant, but yet a little ambiguous, I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Can I add one thing? I can't believe I let this slip, but I think Jesus is a great model for biblical masculinity. Let's not forget about him.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about, if I can say this, I think the thing about masculinity and femininity is not that the characteristics are actually opposite or anything like that. It's how it's expressed.
Yes.
Right. So a woman can be courageous, but there's a masculine type of courage. A woman can be a protector to some extent, but then there's a masculine type of protection. A woman has an obedience that there needs to be, and a man needs to be obedient and disciplined. And so maybe it's the expression of that, rather than saying, well, women just aren't supposed to be courageous or women aren't supposed to be protectors. It's expressed differently. And I think God has given us kind of an understanding how that can be expressed differently between the sexes. Sho, did you look like you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would say I don't know if I agree with that. That's
that's what we're here for.
Yeah, I would just say I don't know. And I hate that because I know we got to go. And I apologize I disappeared for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes because of the internet. But I just don't know if I get what you're saying. I just don't know if and I'll even go back to like to ask Erica a little bit, like when we talk about Jesus, I think part of the issue is saying that Jesus is exclusively an example for men to follow.
No, that would be so detrimental to all women listening. No, that is not what I'm saying. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because, man, I've been reading some really great books by some really great women that have really addressed that, in my heart. So let me not take advantage of the fact that others may not be thinking exactly how I'm thinking. But no, he is not exclusively, because I had somebody come tell me that the other day. But an example for men to follow, but I think in his interactions with other men, his interactions with women, these are things that, you just can't go wrong as a male to follow in his example. And with what Justin was saying, I agree. And, I'm thankful this is a conversation. So it is a growing live thing. And so I'm thankful to have you guys sharpen me. But to Justin's point, we see that, I can't remember the scripture, that Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God, right? Is that how it's said? And then you've got an entire proverb talking about wisdom personified as a woman. And so I think that, I don't know, like I said, I'm not an expert. We've already gone through those disclosures. But at the same time, I definitely do think that there are different characteristics that are fleshed out in women, and they're also fleshed out in men. So
that's good.
But yeah, I get you. Thank you for that.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No. I'm gonna end it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say one of the. Yeah, it's going to open up a whole nother can of worms. So
you sure?
And I don't want to go there. All right. Yeah.
So. Well, I'll say this: if me and Sho went through a whole conversation without disagreeing, it wouldn't have been real. So I'm glad we kept it real. But no, I thank you both for getting on this. I think this is a very important conversation. As Erica pointed out, this is only the beginning of the conversation. But when it comes to issues like masculinity, chances are slim that the biblical point of view is going to be the same as the world's point of view. And that's why we have these crux sessions. So Christians can't simply repeat after secular society. If you take nothing else from this, take that. We want you to think biblically. We want you to think critically. And we want you to be faithful. And hopefully we helped you a little bit with that tonight. See you next time. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Bless it.